Welcome to Golf Industry Guru and the Gig Podcast, where we interview the best and brightest golf and hospitality leaders on the planet. On today's episode, you will learn some proven real-world solutions that'll help you and your team solve some of your biggest golf business challenges. So stick around for some tips, tools, and training to get you, your people, and your business powered on. Here's your host, James Cronk.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen of Gig Nation, and welcome to another Golf Industry Guru podcast. I am your host, James Cronk, and I am thrilled to have our guest today to talk about what is a challenging, complicated, you never know you need it until you need it kind of topic that if you're in the club business long enough, you will find yourself in a situation where you probably need to learn from and listen to and know about Laurie Martin. Laurie Martin, known as the Trauma Mumma. Literally, I can't wait to hear about that. Brings 3 decades of business experience in risk deterrence, but also in crisis trauma education. And connected to Laurie through literally the organizations that we all know very well of, the CMAA, the CMAE, the CMAC, the Club Managers Associations of Canada, Europe, and United States. Laurie has spoken all over the world, has dealt with all kinds of crises and challenging situations, and provides education and support to thousands of people. So without further ado, welcome the Trauma Mama, Laurie Martin, to the podcast stage. Laurie, welcome to the Golf Industry Guru podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me here, James. I feel after you're saying that Trauma Mama thing, I should be giving you all a hug. So feel my hug, okay?
I love it. I love it. I love it. And virtually, that's what people need. You know, the reality, Laurie, I'm going to ask you, obviously, about some examples, but I was just reading a very terrible article today about an accident that happened at one of our golf courses that's, for Gig Nation in Canada, and had a death of an employee, a terrible situation where an accident happened, and they're investigating, obviously, the death of an employee while at work who fell out of a golf cart. And I can only imagine how challenged and difficult it's been right now for that team, the team of employees, for the general managers, a good friend and a wonderful person, and through no fault, obviously, of the club, they're dealing with an accident and all of the challenges that come with that. And as I said in my intro, these things will happen at some point. So Laurie, let's start, if you don't mind. Can you just share your journey about getting into, I guess, the club side of things? But I know you've got a long history before that in insurance and other businesses. So please share with our listeners your journey to this point.
Sure. Well, for some who know me, I was raised in a rural farm community, and little did I know then that I was going to be taught so much about risk and management and what worked well and what didn't work well when growing crops, to working with animals and keeping a dynamic family relationship. I had no idea. I was just growing up on a farm, ended up working in marketing, studied for marketing, business marketing, and I was hired at an insurance company, one of the largest in Canada, put into a position of risk deterrence. And I use risk deterrence because we focus primarily on the people that could be in way of dangers such as robbery, violence, home burning down, business going under, health issues, death, loss, suicide, all those kind of unexpected tragedies, even though we know they're common, but when they happen to us, it's very different. So I started learning the deterrence side, how to keep these things at bay as best you can. For example, a robbery. So you set up all the procedures, all the safety equipment, all the vigilance training that you need the staff to learn should a perpetrator walk into their financial institution. And then the important key here was to be able to debrief everyone and support each other during the many days following that tragedy. So my whole life was engaged in preparing people to be ready for anything. And so when you break that down, it's more like looking at the emotional component of that. How we were raised, like even yourself, James, how do you take care of yourself in a crisis situation? How are you to act in a crisis situation? How were you taught to act in a crisis situation is all part of our character. It becomes part of our belief systems. And so as we go through life and different types of situations happens to us, in the back of our subconscious, we're now thinking, oh, this is how I'm to respond. Oh, don't talk about this. My thoughts and my feelings don't really matter right now. And so we have all this garble of stuff going on inside of us. So this is the area that I focused on primarily for a good chunk of 10 years, learning how to debrief, how to provide intervention, and then taking my knowledge alongside of the learning from the people that were in the critical situation facing this tragedy, whatever that was at the time, and learning from them. So what do you need from me? What do you not want from me? And ask them some situations to keep them into control, such as where would you like to sit? Where would you like to talk? Is there someone you would like to phone? Can I help you phone that person? So we kind of chunk it down into a very easy language. And this is where my whole start of my career began, was focusing primarily on the emotional resilience, the life skills of the person, not so much the big picture of crisis management. People get confused sometimes when I do use the word crisis because it looks like something very humongous. However, it could be anything pertaining to any daily situation that can happen to us.
And so, Laura, for the last decade, I know you've been involved in the club world. You know, how did you kind of get into the club world, and how, I guess now, I know that you touch many different industries, but maybe just share a little bit about your entrance into the club world and now your work in the club world, and let's talk about, you know, what, like when you say crises and you know, what are some examples about what those things can be? Like you said, they're very different for each person. They can be huge front newspaper things that happen, and then they can also just be something that's going on that we don't know is going to happen tomorrow, that all of a sudden happens to our teammates and our members or our employees. So let's get back to your entrance to the club business.
Right. I took a sabbatical in 2010, just decided to take a break from crisis education, do something with a little twist, something fun. So I had an opportunity to work in the Caribbean, and my base was in Barbados. And at that time, I was marketing digital signage. So launching signage in bars and hotels where all the fun life begins.
Sure, there you go.
And the golf clubs too around the Caribbean. And when I was there, various situations were happening. There would be a member get struck by a golf ball. Someone died of a heart attack. A fire was in the kitchen. And it didn't matter where I went, there was always some kind of a situation that I was able to provide my other side of my intervention life, as opposed to the marketing of all the fun products they put on screens. What I like so much about working with the food and beverage world and working with the GMs is there's such an excitement. It just always made me feel that there's something more to crisis in life. And falling into the food and beverage world, we're working with GMs, it just was like, wow, I want to continue doing this. My contract was only a year, so I knew I'd be coming back. And when I did return, I said, I want to stay in this industry. And I met a couple of GMs that I wanted to talk to about how do I keep my feet wet into this industry. And it was suggested that I write a proposal to speak at the CMAA. And this was in 2012. And within a few weeks, I was accepted and spoke my first talk at CMAA in 2013. And I was embraced. The room was full. People were standing along the walls. It was a subject that was seldom discussed.
Seldom discussed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, seldom, and still seldom discussed, to be honest. Yes. And that's why I know you're in demand as a speaker. But sorry, keep going.
And also seldom taught what to do, what not to do, and what to say, because we wait for something to happen. So my blessing at that was being embraced by the club chapters and being able to speak and teach crisis education from a very human standpoint, teaching the language of what to say, do, and not. There is a language. We do not have to use words that people do not understand or long phrases or long sentences, because when people are in a high stress mode, they're not hearing half of what you're saying. And I can give an example of this. I've had many stories over the years share where someone has told them something tragic. For example, a gentleman told me that when his daughter was diagnosed with cancer, the doctor was telling him this situation. He's a GM of a club. And he said he couldn't hear the words from the doctor. And he started getting irritated, and he couldn't believe that this was his daughter and this can't be happening to him, to the point that a nurse had to come in and cool him down. So these situations can happen so easily to any one of us. Mm-hmm. Where I'm coming from a leader's perspective, is we may think our team automatically will know what to do and how to respond. And we also think we know what we're going to do to respond effectively. We'll wait till it happens. However, as you shared that story where an employee died on the premises of a golf club, that's never expected. Never. And so how do you deal with that? Because that's not always in the plan. So one of the key things of learning about crisis education is not looking at the big picture, but focusing really on the people and your leadership skills. What are you ready to do? How are you going to do this? And how as a team are you going to work together for the many days following this particular critical situation?
So I know I'm going to ask you in a minute about how to be prepared, how to be ready, crisis ready. But if you're listening right now and you're managing a club or you're managing a department or you own a golf facility or whatever you might be in the club business, how do you determine right now, I guess, if you're ready? What do you need to have in the toolbox? What questions should you be asking yourself? I think any club manager, certainly anyone that's been around for a few years, will have stories of situations that have happened on their watch, right? And he or she will have had something that, has happened. When I think back about my career of, 30 years of being in the club business, I've had everything from I've given mouth to mouth to someone that had a heart attack and was on the ground, unfortunately dead. While I was doing that for 20 minutes, I have been robbed. I have had fires. I have had floods. I've had terrible incidents. I've had, the list goes on and on and on. And I can't imagine that I've got the worst luck in the world. I would imagine that any club manager that's been managing clubs for a decade or two is going to have their own list of situations that they've come across. And then, of course, know of their peers that have lived through something at work or at not at work. So Laurie, what are the questions that you ask yourself before, I guess, you embark on a path to become crisis ready?
The first question is, how ready am I as a leader? How well do I understand my own methods of dealing with crisis? Do I understand enough on how my own team may react to crisis? And how, as a leader, can I adapt and connect to my team better so that we can make this work? So simplifying it would be, how ready are you and your team when a death happens at your club? Now, you shared a story, James, about this death recent at a club. Here's an example that we can move this over just to have our listeners kind of look at their own perspective. Mm-hmm. I was called into a club where a visitor was golfing and on the 18th hole had a heart attack. The team from the pro shop, who were trained in CPR and first aid, were the first ones to go out. So they're the first crisis responder. In the meantime, we're hoping someone's calling 911. So they respond, they bring the gentleman back because he seemed to be okay, but then he kind of, I guess by the time they got him to the pro shop, he's outside and he's laying on his back. And of course, having a heart attack isn't a pretty thing to witness. I mean, the skin is purple and red and the eyes are bulging and there's a whole lot going on. And this one gentleman that was trained in CPR ripped the shirt open and started pounding his chest. Now, during this, there's a lot of activity going on. There's people witnessing, there's panic, there's a lot of emotion, and this young man is pounding his chest. This visitor dies. By the time the ambulance came, he was already dead. Life goes on, of course. The body's removed. Staff, hopefully, they're kind of in enough emotional resilience to go back to their routine. But you can only imagine that the emotions are so high that the thinking kind of drops because we can hardly even understand what happened. So the reality is really slow, right? So a couple of days goes by, and I'm called by the GM that John is not himself in the pro shop anymore. He's quiet. He's been calling in sick. They're not understanding what's going on. He doesn't want to go to a counselor. And I think that's a really good topic too, because when we look at our resources, because something happens immediately to us doesn't mean we need to be fixed. It doesn't mean we need to go to a counselor immediately, because our staff can be trained how to support individuals around them and to identify signs if they need that support or more support. But that's a whole piece on its own. So going back to my story, what happened was, because John didn't want to have a therapist, it was suggested if he was open to talking to me, because I work with emergency responders. What happened was John started sharing his story, how after he did what he thought was CPR training and this visitor died, it was his fault. That is such a common feeling after trying to help someone revive with CPR, right? Mm-hmm. So the second thing is he kept saying to me how he was driving home and all you could see is this man's face in the windshield. This was terrifying for him. And he said he wobbled out of the car. He was so shaky and he couldn't sleep in his bed. He slept on the floor, and this was going on for days. He didn't even want to eat. And he didn't want to go to work. But when he went to work, he felt he needed to hide because nobody could understand his feelings or what was going on with him. And it was best just to stay away, then nobody would notice him. He had no one that he felt safe to talk to. So as we work through the process of what happens in a critical situation and understanding the foundation of it, he started realizing these things were happening to him, that he was okay, that he was normal. And he did everything he possibly could to help revive the visitor. this gentleman that he was feeling responsible for his life. So these stories, there's so many stories of you, as you've shared, James, on different situations and how we react. So with proper training, and here's the key, when you're taught CPR to the point that you can do it in your sleep, you can administer first aid in seconds because you're so used to it. This is helping our staff and employees not be set up to fail, that they know they can be crisis ready, that they know what they need to do now without any second guessing. And oftentimes I have gone into clubs, and believe me, the heart and the mind of leadership is always there for the people, but sometimes we just get too busy to focus on the emotional resilience skills that people have. It's just get it done, get it over, and make sure it's right. And so this training is really important so we don't set people up to fail. Another story, which is common right across all clubs, when members have had a loved one die, for the people that are serving them in the dining room or in the pro shop, it's very awkward to even know what to say to these people. And sometimes they don't say anything. And so there's so many mixed messages that can happen from that. So it's awkward. So the education of being proactive and being crisis ready is removing that awkwardness to learn something different that you can make a difference yourself the next time if that should ever happen again, no matter what it is.
We'll get back to our conversation in a moment. But first, are you ready to learn from the world's greatest golf and hospitality industry leaders? Train your team and grow your business with a membership to Golf Industry Guru. Join for less than $3 per day and give your entire team access to over 150 hours of courses, podcasts, webinars, templates, articles, live Q&A calls, and more. Free content samples and registration details at golfindustryguru.com.
It just makes me think, Laurie, about, of course, you're going to have a club that is crisis ready, and then the reality is you're going to have most clubs that haven't had these kinds of conversations, and even when we talk about where's the defibrillator and who knows how to use it, and are they scheduled at the right time and the right place, and et cetera, So there's all kinds of different challenges there, I think, that come with being crisis ready. You talk about, going into clubs and helping them with getting crisis ready. What are some of the things, like as a leader, like we all want to be empathetic, we all want to listen, we all want to be caring, but we also, need to be strong and sometimes a disciplinarian, and we've got to, hold people accountable and all those types of things. And when you talk about, soft skills or emotional skills, what, in your experience, when you see when you come into a club, I'm sure for you, just like for me, sometimes you can go into a club and the people reflect the type of leadership that is happening in that club, right? They're either they're open and they're laughing and they're having fun, or they're worried they're going to get their hand slapped and they are hiding in the corner, and everything in between. Those are two extremes, but of course. But what are some leadership skills that I should work on if I want to get my team crisis ready and I want to make myself crisis ready? What are some of the leadership skills that are at the highest level of priority and importance?
Mm-hmm. The first thing that comes to mind is being proactive and really start to reflect on your own leadership skills and you as a person. I do a reflection piece in my workshops that just kind of takes people to that preparation spot. My question would be, think of the first time you had your own personal critical situation. You can call it a crisis, a critical situation, You can call it a life interruption, whatever that was for you. Who is there for you? What was said that felt good? What was said that didn't feel good? What worked well? And if you could do that differently, how would that be for you? And could this happen again? When you reflect and think of that, that might be helpful in learning how you were taught how to deal with death, with suicide, with heart attack, with a major situation such as a fire or a flood, or witnessing a car accident or an injury. Some of us are really not good at blood, guts, and gore. So when you have your team, one of the things as a leader is it's important to have that question asked. How many are you really comfortable with first aid? How many are you a little squeamish? Because there is a place on the team for everyone. They might not be the frontliners. They might be the people that do the administration. They might be the ones that are connecting to the members to share what has happened. So as a leader, it's really important to reflect on your own crisis response skills. The second would be training, continuous training. I know there's CPR. I know there's first aid training and there's risk deterrence. However, oftentimes these are placed to the side as much as we believe that they're there and we're the best at administering. That doesn't always happen to all clubs, and we can be honest about that. And simple training, like I think it's really key that awareness about grief, how to deal with grief and loss, how to talk to members, how to talk to each other, with mental health, with mental wellness, for example, after the pandemic, people kind of disconnected from communication. So that's a big key in learning what to say, do, and not in different aspects of critical situations. So, and I think as leaders, it's just being open-minded. I'm not going to say number 1, 2, and 3 to do these tasks. I think it's really, a club is led by first the GM, the board, and the employees. They all work in sync with one another. However, the GM has a big influence on the people. So either it's people first or it's maybe not that focused.
Well, yeah, I mean, in today's day and age, you better be people first, or else you're not going to last, and you're not going to keep good people, and then you're going to have a real tough time doing your job. So you better find a way to become people first. Laurie, a little bit more about your work with clubs. So do you go into a club before something happens? Do you get phone calls before things happen or after things happen? Like, or is it 50-50? Is it 80-20? Like obviously, valuable to bring you in or to talk to leaders. And I can understand how valuable your session would be for club managers, because once again, as you say, this is just not things that we talk about. These are not things that we are sharing. Sometimes we'll share them at the bar afterwards when we're telling a story about what happened to Bill or to Susan at their club last week. But we're not proactively strategizing about how to make sure that we've got as many boxes ticked to be prepared for something. So when you go into a club, let me ask you a different question. When you go into a club before anything's happened, right? They're trying to get crisis ready. What are the steps? What's the program you take them through? What's the timeline? How does that work?
The first step would be to learn what crisis is and isn't. And that's the nucleus is understanding the foundation of the 5 characteristics, because that's really key. So 5 characteristics of what's a crisis? Mm-hmm.
Can you share those with us?
Sure. So the first would be the sudden and unexpected. That's with anything. The fire goes boom in the kitchen, or the cart tips out on the green. or a member dies, sudden and unexpected. Someone has been diagnosed with cancer. I mean, recently I've heard many of these situations happening at clubs with employees, and it's tough to hear this, right? So sudden and unexpected. And I had one person share with me once that their father had Alzheimer's. And she said, Laurie, even with my dad with Alzheimer's, when he forgot my name, that was sudden and unexpected. So these characteristics are something, once you learn them, they stay with you for the rest of your life, because you can put it into your surroundings and your belief systems. Disrupts our control. We as people love control. We always have to be in control. And when we lose control, what happens? We get upset, or we don't understand the why or what's happening to me. So sometimes losing control could be our body loses control. We can't control it anymore. Our home or our club is no longer safe. Our world is no longer safe. I think of the pandemic, how we were all so confined and life changed and we lost control. And so then we fall into the third one, which is the disrupts our beliefs and our values. So I love going into this section with the teams, because I get them to share what their beliefs are about their club, about their strengths, about helping people in specific areas that they work in. What's a value? And then we get into a little bit of grief and loss in there, because if you're not taught it, you don't really know it unless you've experienced it. And even then, it's different for everyone, right? Then the personal perception of a life-damaging threat. Now, this is huge, because I remember someone telling me, I was an employee, they said, I was on my way to work. I got hit. My car spun. The ambulance came. I was okay. They told me I could go back to work if I wanted to. I decided I would. I told my story, and people would say things like, well, you're not dead, are you? So these unexpected things is because we're not trained really well on what to say or to help someone, because you always want to keep the empowerment to them on their side, not about you, right? So that personal perception of a life-damaging threat, even though it didn't happen, it's still real. And then the visible physical loss. So we then share what happens at a club. We talk about the things that have happened. And we really think then outside of the box, what could possibly happen here? I remember a club telling me at Christmas, they had this event. 2 guys with guns came in and held them, against their will, and robbed their jewelry and took any cash they had. And they weren't expecting that. That was pretty scary. And they didn't even do a debrief or any kind of support afterwards. And that doesn't mean support in psychological therapy or anything. That means like intervention, meaning people take you through a process of questions to de-escalate the stress, to normalize things. So that's a whole nother topic. And then, of course, there's the invisible physical loss and the emotional loss that's seldom talked about. So that is like one little component, but it has so many layers. But learning that alone, that helps people put things into perspective for the rest of their life. I have people 6 years ago that have taken this training show up in an email saying, Laurie, remember when you taught me this personal life unexpected threat? And it happened to me and I remembered everything you taught me. So I know it's something that we should be taught. When I was working in the insurance industry, crisis intervention education wasn't even discussed. It wasn't even on the radar for corporations or clubs. It just wasn't there until the later 80s. Then crisis management started playing a part. But this here component of the human element, the people first, this is what I believe is key for any club manager, any leader wanting to make one iota of a difference to enhance the health and safety and emergency plans for their teams. It's key.
It's so true. Scott and I, with our platform, we've added a couple new platforms, and they're in the risk and the reduction of risk business. It's like being prepared or creating a culture of safety or a culture of risk reduction, so that at least you minimize the chances of something, happening that is going to hurt someone or hurt a guest or whatever it might be, or damage property or your assets. But I do in all the conversations I've had with like insurance companies and with people in the safety business and other people like that, golf courses and clubs are just this literal, there's so many examples of things that we have to be aware of and careful of, as we joke, not really joke, but you put 200 people out on a field and with a bunch of holes and lakes and areas in the ground, and give them golf carts and give them a bunch of beer and then just see what happens. I mean, where else would that happen, without there being a whole bunch of questions or risk reduction elements before you allow that to happen. So there's no doubt so many things can happen in a club. I can only imagine how valuable your services must be when something happens at a club and the leader just, where do you turn, right? It's just like, where do I turn? How do I get, like you said, whether it's therapy or whether it's emotional support or whether it's questions or whether it's, a group conversation, facilitating a group conversation. As we always say, you don't know you need it until it happens. And then sometimes it can be too late. So, you've got a book, Laurie, and is there anything in your book? First of all, I want you to tell our listeners about your book and about your speaking sessions. And then is there anything else in that content that you want to share with our listeners today on our podcast?
Yes, you mentioned the word risk reduction, and I appreciate that word more so than prevention. I lived in the insurance industry and working with financial advisors as well. And we cannot prevent anything from happening. We can deter it. We can reduce the risk. But if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And as a suicide interventionist and talking with people that are in that place of thinking they would like to die or not, at the end of the day, we do our very, very best to reduce, deter, and try to stop. But at the very end, it's the individual or that situation that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And so that's why it's really important to be ready for anything. That is key. And in your book and in your speaking sessions, Laurie, first of all, how does someone buy your book or get in touch with you for speaking at their club or for working with you? Let's make sure we get that. Okay, thanks, James. You mentioned earlier, which is the process? Do I go into a club first or do I go in after? Mm-hmm. This is important because employment assistance programs is huge. And I know that in the club world, we're an intimate group. As big as we are around the globe, we're a pretty intimate group. And we like to work with referrals. So if ABC Club knows that someone in D needs a referral, they share and they count on those referrals of the people that come in that are effective and that can help, no matter if it's training or if it's intervention or if it's counseling. It's important, I believe, for any club leader who relies on their HR or even a team member that looks after the supports to interview those people they want to have on their contact list. Not everyone needs therapy. Some do need intervention and support, which is an educational process, very different than therapy. Because within the first 74 hours, The emotions are so high, as I mentioned earlier, that the thinking is low. Doesn't mean you can't think, but it's really important to know that somebody can help de-escalate that to get you back into the kind of the regular pump of who you are. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's really important. Also, the education of the human element, people first, the emotional resilience, life skills, that's a key for any club. Where I come in, people know that I can come in for intervention, that I'm there to spend a day or 3 days. That's what I have been doing. Sometimes it's now virtual. People will talk to me virtually. That seems to be working too, which is a lot easier than paying me to fly somewhere to do the work. Mm-hmm. And most of the teams enjoy being on a screen. They don't feel that they're having a finger pointed at them. So it's a little different type of support. Mm-hmm. So they can be quiet if they want to, or don't feel anybody's really looking at them. So it's a whole new way of providing that skill. So that to me is important, that just focusing on the people, knowing who your resources are, know that there's people like me out there, and rely on other club managers who they've been working with or who they recommend. That's really important.
Love it. Love it. How can someone get in touch with you, Laurie? How do they find you?
Sure. My phone number is 647-868-8827. My direct email is lifeinterruptedinc@gmail.com. And Life Interrupted has 2 R's. Some people forget the 1 R.
There you go.
It's lifeinterruptedinc@gmail.com. And my book is on my website. And oftentimes I will gift my book because if there's something going down at a club, I will PDF it, because really my book has become something as a gift just to support people right now. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Laurie, your work is so valuable. I've spoken to a couple of club managers that have had the difficulty and also the pleasure of working with you because obviously sometimes when people are reaching out to you, they've gone through something challenging at their club. So it's great the work that you do in supporting club managers. I invite anyone in Gig Nation and beyond listening to this podcast to learn more about Laurie and her work. Reach out to her, go to her website. All that information is going to be posted below on the podcast. But Laurie, it's been wonderful. We could have done. We'll do another session again because there's lots of things we kind of touched on that I would love to delve deeper into because it's such an important topic. And as you said and I said, it's really not something that we talk enough about. I did this session a few months ago called, it's all fun and games till someone loses an eye, and it's tongue in cheek. But the reality is that, we work in a business where we're trying to create fun. We're trying to create excitement. We're trying to create happy customers and happy members and happy staff. And all of a sudden that can take a complete 9-degree turn if something happens, and then how we recover from that. And using someone like yourself and having someone like yourself help us is critically important. So thank you so much for joining our Golf Industry Guru podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, it's been a pleasure chatting with Laurie today, and I hope you enjoyed this Gig Nation podcast. And as always, we will see you next time on The Inside.
Thanks for listening to the Gig Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode and mostly that you learned a few things that will help you improve your business. Join us next time as we continue to bring you the best and brightest golf and hospitality leaders on the planet. Thanks for listening.